Welcome back to the 40 Acres Football Podcast. We're deep into the offseason now, especially for Texas. We're starting to look at the Senior Bowl, the East West Shrine Bowl, what guys are going to get drafted where, how is Texas going to replace them. As always, I'm joined by my esteemed guests, Joseph Duffy and Robert Gonsolin. Today, we got a little bit to talk about. It's not going to be a super long episode. Going to talk a little bit about what this roster is going to look like next year, with some of the major pieces leaving. What are some key spots that need to be replaced? And then we're going to look at how some of the Longhorns have fared in, Senior Bowl and Shrine Bowl practices. And we'll see where that takes us. Shouldn't be too long of an episode, but as always, we're glad to have you listening with us. We're going to start off talking about what Texas is going to have to replace next season, losing a bunch of guys to the draft. They have over 20 guys declared for the draft, leaving whether as a transfer, a draftee, or a senior that doesn't necessarily have to declare but is out of eligibility. And I think, in particular, the hardest position to replace is going to be the tight end position. Steve Sarkisian has done a really good job of replacing tight ends in his tenure here. So I don't think there's going to be a huge issue at that position, but it is going to be a tough position to replace with Gunnar Helm heading to the NFL a year after Jatavion Sanders heads to the NFL as well. So they still got some talent there. Jordan Washington, obviously. So we'll see how that's going to look. But I think that's going to be a tough position to replace. And I think another area that Texas is going to struggle is that offensive line. Everyone's been talking about it already. What is Texas going to do at the offensive line? You're going to have Trevor Gooseby. You still have DJ Campbell, but everything else is pretty much a question mark. So an offensive line that was one of the best in football over the last 3 years is now going to look a whole lot different. Robert, give me some of your thoughts on those positions in particular and where you think Texas can make some improvements on this roster.
Yeah, so I think in particular, the offense is going to like firepower will be fine. There will be new to a lot of players new to college football in terms of like Jamie French, Khalil Lockett. He's a receiver, right? He's um they'll have that firepower, but yes, it starts with the offensive line, and I think any good team is as good as their offensive line is. So with that being said, like Texas can bring all that firepower to this year's season, but their level of success will be determined by how well Arch Manning can be protected in the pocket. And because we saw that with Shador Sanders over at Colorado this year, a lot of offensive talent, Travis Hunter, um, what was his name? LeJounte Wester. I think that was his name, their second receiver. Shador Sanders had some offensive line issues, and that was kind of a liability for them. I think Texas will be facing the same issue this year, and that they have the offensive weapons to score points. They have the firepower, but they have a lot of new players on this offensive line. I think DJ Campbell returning is huge for them. Trevor Gooseby, getting those reps against Texas A&M and M and a little bit against Clemson, that certainly has helped them kind of integrate a soon-to-be starter into the offense. So those are the positives you have. But at the same time, you've got some new starters coming in. I think Cole Hudson will be starting this year, and starting in the SEC in the trenches, that's a big deal. That's no that's a feat you cannot shy away from. It's the toughest offensive lineman in college football. And so what I'm trying to say here is, having DJ Campbell returning to lead that line and then having Gooseby, having started some, getting those reps already, those are major positives. But you have to balance those positives with the liabilities of having three new starters come in on that line, and how will the offense fare out with that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, to piggyback off what he was saying, I mean, it is a lot of losses, especially on the offensive line. But the good thing is for the receiving core, I mean, you're always going to have talent on that Texas receiving core. Skilled players that are able to get the ball in their hands from the talented guys and Arch Manning and Quinn Ewers in the past. So that's never, again, I've said this in the past, it's never going to be a worry for this Texas offense, the receiving core. The linemen, I am a little bit concerned with. I'm not going to lie to you, because it's hard to build that type of camaraderie and chemistry. That line was relatively healthy throughout the majority of the season. Every now and then you'd see, Calvin Banks shaking up as well, Cam Williams shaking up at times, and Trevor Gooseby found a way to really hold his own, even coming in as a swing tackle. But I would think the loss of Calvin Banks might hurt, yeah, it might hurt Texas the most. Um, to start off the next season, you'll see how he's an NFL talent. He'll be a first round talent, of course, coming in this draft, but you'll see how much of an impact he'll have in next season. But there's always hope when you have the money that Texas has. They'll always have the great recruits that are attracted here to this legendary program. So I would say O-line is the biggest concern, but overall, I think this team will still be fine overall.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
think I
I,
think
I
there are a lot of things. Or you got it.
I was just going to talk about, I was going to pivot a little bit to the secondary. I think, losing Jade is obviously going to hurt a whole lot. It's going to be impossible to replace him. But when you have a guy like Kobe Black stepping in at, 18 years old, 2024 class, the seventh or the sixth quarterback recruit in the nation, he's a guy that I think is going to step up really nicely for Texas. He's going to step in and be a solid player in that secondary. When you have a leader like Michael Taft still sticking around, especially to kind of show all these young guys, these new guys, the ropes, that's really irreplaceable. And so you're going to lose some talent, but keeping some of that leadership back there. We saw some social media posts from the Texas football team. They started their offseason workout regimen. And it already looked like Michael Taft was the leader from just a few pictures. Now, that could be curated for social media, but he is the oldest guy in that secondary. He's going to play a huge role in both developing the talent, giving them the confidence, and then leading that defense too.
No, mo most definitely. And I think that the defense is in a much better spot than the offense is in terms of how many players they're losing after this past season and how many they're retaining. Anthony Hill, Colin Simmons, Jalen Gilbo, Kobe Black, Jelani McDonald still being there, Leon Lafau, I can go on and on. Those players all still being there is a major positive for them. But with just with the offense trying to retain that same level of firepower, they're going to struggle just a little bit. But the defense, they're in pretty good shape with Taff, already bringing that firepower.
And not just, the players, the coaching as well. Pete Kwiatkowski is still with this defense. That could end up being one of the biggest retainments for this Texas defense or Texas coaching staff in general. I really thought he was a goner. The defense had a great showing throughout the entire season. You can say Texas leaned on them for the majority of the season, surprisingly, even when you hire a guy like Steve Sarkisian for his offensive prowess a few years ago. But Pete Kwiatkowski has been one of the best assistants in the nation. I thought he really could have been the Broyles Award winner for the best assistant in the country, too. He was obviously in contention for that. But, you saw how well that defense played even when Texas lost against Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl. And that was a great defensive performance. I wish Texas could have gotten the job done because that was really a great defense that was kind of wasted in a way in that championship game. So that was a big win for Texas to keep Pete Kwiatkowski. And you'll see why this defense is once again still elite in the country, even the SEC that was supposed to strike fear uh, in the new additions with Texas and Oklahoma a few years ago. But Texas's defense held its own throughout the entire year. And now with the schedule flipped, we'll see how this team fares.
Yeah, in particular, we always talk about, especially for the NFL, like a team like the Kansas City Chiefs, when you have continuity in your coordinating staff, some of your coaches that can stick around and help you build the culture. You're not turning over a new offensive coordinator every single year or a new defensive coordinator every other year to go be a head coach somewhere else. I think that's huge. I mean, Steve Spagnuolo for the Chiefs, he's been there for how long, and you've seen him develop this defense for Kansas City into something that of a powerhouse. And for the most part, nobody's going to go and poach him. Now, for Pete Kwiatkowski, that could come within the next year or two, he could definitely find himself coaching at a different school next year, next couple years, but it this team has continuity in the coaching staff, which is the most important thing right now. As you kind of turn over the roster, we've seen the development from year one of the Sarkisian era to now year four. And when you have the culture set, you have the coaches sticking around, that plays a huge role in making sure that you're still a powerhouse in a conference like the SEC.
I mean, like you were saying, Chris Jones made the point a few nights ago. As long as we have Steve Spagnuolo, we're going to be in the game, and that just shows how much he respects his coach, obviously, but also the process of continuity. If you have the same familiar faces that have helped you win, and they're not trying to go anywhere else, and they're completely bought in to the program, you're going to reap the benefits from it for the most part. And so, hopefully, Texas can really start improving even more and getting outside of that top four threshold and maybe advance to a championship game in the future because they surely have earned it. And they put the work in these past few years when they've been accused of being too, bells and whistly and not so focused on team culture. I'll never forget what Matt Campbell said, a few years ago after Iowa State beat Texas in DKR. And he was saying basically five-star culture beats five-star talent. And, you always have to have the players if you want to compete at the big level in FBS football. But he wasn't necessarily wrong there, and I know that rubbed a lot of Longhorns fans the wrong way, as it should have, because he lost to Iowa State, historically one of the worst programs in the history of the Big 12 and also D1 football. But Matt Campbell has really found a way to make them a consistent winning culture. But when you have that continuity and you have the same coaching staff that you can lean on day in and day out through, the winter workouts, through spring football, all the way to the summer, it's a whole process that you're going through. And that's what makes the winners in the end.
Most definitely. And I think we're starting trying to or we're starting to see the true effects of the Sarkisian recruiting era. I think this is the first class where none of Tom Herman's recruits are still, or the first year where none of Tom Herman's recruits are still on the team. So this season coming up, it's going to be exciting to see like a full-fledged capability of success with an entirely built Sarkisian roster. I believe some of the most recent recruits on Texas who gave him a lot of success were from Tom Herman. I think Gunnar Helm was a Tom Herman recruit, if I'm not mistaken. Some other ones I feel like maybe was Baron Sorrell a Herman recruit?
That
Alfred Collins
actually,
was.
I'm
Alfred
not
Co
I'm not totally
I know
sure.
Alfred Collins was, and but just point being here is this is the first time where we're gonna have an entirely built Steve Sarkisian roster. It'll be exciting to see what he can do and the level of success he will try to obtain with all the pieces he put together on his own accord.
Yeah, and we've already seen what he can do when 80% of the roster are the guys that he's recruited. I mean, especially the last 2 years in particular, most of the guys that are balling out or were balling out that have now gone to the NFL were Sarkisian recruits. And then the couple of new guys, Colin Simmons and Anthony Hill, that have been absolute studs that Steve Sarkisian recruited. So, yeah, 100%. I think, having all of your recruits be under one coach now, under the same coaching staff, same development staff, that's going to be huge for Texas. That's really not something you can understate going forward. It just feels like they're systemic in the way that they're building this thing, especially the last couple years. And going forward, it's just going to maintain that same standard until you start to lose some of those coaches that mean a lot to the program. You're not going to see some of those holes be as glaring when you look at talent.
Yeah, and it's just gonna be quite interesting because I feel like Texas, their offense, regardless of who they were recruited from or levels of talent that each player had, they've managed to come together and play through Sarkisian and Kyle Flood's offense these past 2 years and play through them well. We've seen, back-to-back semifinal appearances. So it's interesting because people were mocking Sarkisian's play calling again at the goal line, that goal line stand against Ohio State. Well, if this team can play well through the 2 recent years of success, if they can play well through those 2 recent years and then find a way to tweak that red zone play with many new players on the offense in 2024, all these new players that get have joined their starting lineup, this could be one of the best things that's happened to Texas. Not because of, I mean, yes, the success they've had recently was caused by a ton of great talent into Tavion Sanders, Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Brooks, Quinn Ewers. But when you bring on this new talent and you're looking for a way to tweak that red zone offense issue, this could be one of the best things that has ever happened to Texas.
I mean, if I'm not mistaken, they didn't go out and get like a huge special teams recruit, did they? As far as place kicking?
They got a punter.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
got a punter.
yeah. So punter, but in terms of place kicking, I don't know what this team is gonna do. And I'm pretty sure that was the big weak point from this team that we can all agree on this year with Bert Auburn, of course. At times the punting, but not always. But when you have a good offense and that is struggling really, that struggles in the red zone primarily, you need to get points on the board. Having a kicker shank a lot of those, 30 to 40 yard kicks, maybe 40 to 45 kicks, that's a bad sign for a team that's just trying to rely on the defense. That's what you saw in the second half of the season, primarily for Texas. So I'm guessing it's set in stone that Bert Auburn is going to be place kicking. I don't know if he's going to compete with Will Stone. If Will Stone even returns, is he allowed to return? Or is he gone?
It sounds like he's still bought into this team. He's posting TikToks in the locker room, doing some fun dances, or he's
Well,
having fun doing dances, and just looks like he's just having a great time with the vibe of the team right now. So I assume he's coming back.
yeah. So whatever it is, I'm guessing they're sold on those two guys competing the entire beginning of this year because. I mean, the fact that Bert Auburn was struggling like he was his worst year as a Texas Longhorn, um, I guess he's the leading man, but Will Stone will give him something to challenge on in spring. I'm really surprised they didn't go out to get a solid kicker in the transfer portal, but it is what it is. Maybe they're saying they're confident enough in their guys, but that was something that was glaringly interesting from my viewpoint from the transfer cycle because I thought they were going to go straight after a kicker instead of just focusing on the punt game. So,
And it makes you wonder, I'm not too keen on the transfer portal place kicking scene. Like, are there, if a kicker is in the transfer portal, is he a great kicker? I don't know. But that's a good point. I think that was definitely a weak point for Texas this season. And how does a place kicking competition even work through the offseason and into training camp? Because most of the time, you know who your kicker is going to be, and you don't watch him work out all that much. Like that's normally, he goes out there 45 minutes before practice and he gets his kicks up then, hangs around in practice for special team situations, whatever, kicks a little after practice. Like kickers don't really get a lot of coaching spotlight. So that's going to be another interesting. Oh, did I cut out there for a second?
you froze. We thought we were cooked for a second.
No, we're good. But yeah, I don't know how that's going to work for the place kicking competition. Coaches don't normally watch that. So we'll see what ends up happening there. If I were to bet money, I think Bert Auburn's got the job again going into next season. You have the experience. I think he's probably going to get it. But that's going to be a very interesting storyline.
And the scary thing about place kicking is there's nothing that can match, that adrenaline that happens when you need a clutch kick in the off season.
No,
Nothing matches that.
no.
You can't replicate it in practice. There's nothing like 70,000, 80,000 fans roaring right at you as you sit on underneath them and you're down two, needing a clutch kick to take the lead. Nothing's going to match that in spring football. And that's what makes it tough for coaches to evaluate who's the kicker I'm going to need in the clutch to, swing the momentum. I don't know what they're going to do because Will Stone, we were hearing rumors that he was going to be the guy that was going to kick and he eventually did in Ohio State game. And I don't remember, but I don't think he
Get
got
much
a,
of
a
an
really, yeah,
opportunity.
he didn't
Yeah.
have an opportunity. He got an extra point in a few of them, but he didn't get his opportunity to showcase his leg that we've been waiting to see. So we'll see. We'll see how this goes in spring.
Yeah, and on that note, I mean, we might as well move over to some NFL draft discussion here real quick. Baron Sorrell has the spotlight on him in Mobile for the Senior Bowl. But it's going to be a tough draft for him to really move up boards because it's an edge heavy draft. He's probably going to be an edge rusher guy, and I really don't think that he is of the caliber of some of the top edge rushers in the draft. I think he's a phenomenal player. But when you're playing alongside guys like Colin Simmons and Vernon Broughton and Anthony Hill and Ethan Burke, like you're going to get more one-on-one looks. You should, take care of those looks in certain situations. So it's going to be interesting to watch him play. One thing I will say though, watching the Senior Bowl or the East West Shrine Bowl, so much better than watching something like the Pro Bowl. Like these guys have to compete to try and raise their draft stock and get a job going into next season. So those in my opinion are way better than watching something like the Pro Bowl, which has just completely fallen off. But that's another point. Robert, what are you thinking about Baron Sorrell's stock? What have you seen from the practice clips if you've watched any?
Yeah, so like just to reiterate some of what you said, I don't think he's at all a top edge rusher or, you know, outside linebacker who's supposed to go very high in the draft. But from what I've watched, I don't know if you've seen this, but there's a lot of buzz on social media right now. I say a lot, but like if you're really following the Senior Bowl in the NFL draft, there's a good amount of buzz on this duel between Barron Sorrell and LSU offensive tackle Emory Jones that they had. They had three back-to-back-to-back one-on-one reps against each other. And there's a lot of debate right now because of how close and competitive that one-on-one matchup went. There's a lot of debate on who won the three reps. What was the score? Was it 2-1 Emory Jones? Was it 2-1 Baron Sorrell? I mean, Sorrell, there's a few good clips of him bull rushing the offensive tackle and jumping right off and throwing the offensive tackle to the side and putting his arm out and showing I got the quarterback. That's like a little hand motion he's doing. In the first play, he goes against Emory Jones. He gets off the tackle right away, but you see Riley Leonard, who's playing quarterback, kind of step up into the pocket, mimicking the quarterback's ability to get away from the sack. And people are on one side saying if the quarterback's able to step up in the pocket right there, then the offensive tackle wins. But with Baron Sorrell's ability to get off that block so easily and show he showed a lot of dominant power and yanking Emory Jones away from him, they're saying no, I think that Baron Sorrell won that matchup. And so I from what I've seen so far with his film in Mobile, it's certainly helping him more than it is hurting him. It's just I've seen lists of who's sticking out the most, and it's like quarterback, Jackson Dart, running back, so and so, wide receiver, so and so, and then you get to edge, and it's like these four or five guys. So it's clearly an edge heavy draft that he's gonna have to play his best to get into. But the amount of buzz he's been able to generate for himself is certainly helping him right now.
Yeah, and if you want to watch that game, obviously we'll be tuned in to bring you anything next week on this. But that's going to be tomorrow at 1:30 Central. If you're in Texas, obviously 2:30 Eastern. That's going to be a fun game to watch. Obviously, there's a lot of storylines, bunch of players trying to raise their stock and try and become a higher draft pick heading into the NFL season. But yeah, on that note, there are a few guys that have kind of started to announce that they're not going to play in the Shrine Bowl, not going to play in the Senior Bowl. I don't have too, I'm not super opinionated on it. I think protecting yourself is the best thing you can do if you're a guaranteed draft pick. Uh, but Jaden Blue in particular is one guy who opted out. And I think that's an interesting thing to watch because it could mean that he's leaning towards making a return to college football, which also might mean that he could transfer to a new school. So that's definitely a storyline to watch. And then Shadur Sanders came out and said that he was actually asked by an NFL team to not play in the Shrine Bowl. So, Robert, I don't know if you have any thoughts on Jaden Blue opting out in particular that you want to share.
I I was certainly surprised by Blue's decision to opt out of the Shrine Bowl only because he decided to go in the draft with a lot of, you know, questionable things that fans were saying toward about him in terms of like, oh, he's had some issues with fumbling the ball, or fans were thinking he's probably going to transfer because Wisner and Baxter are going to be taking over in the running back room at Texas, and if he decides to stay, he's not going to get that much that many reps. And so him going to the draft certainly cleared up that room, but then you're left thinking as someone watching from the outside, okay, this guy, he certainly has the quickness and has the shiftiness to make moves. He does have that talent, and he proved that in the college football playoffs. But this is a player who still needs to probably up his draft stock quite a bit because no one was really expecting him to go to the draft. And when you're opting out of an opportunity where a ton of players, like the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl, that is become a game where it's not just for the top players in college football, it's for the players in college football who are able to get drafted, but who are really looking to improve their stock. And so they're capitalizing on those opportunities to do so. Jaden Blue, I think a lot of people would say, I would say he's someone who needed to capitalize on an opportunity to raise his draft stock. That certainly was an opportunity. And him opting out is surprising because you're left thinking, okay, is he either really that confident in like just himself personally? Is he that confident in his draft stock? Is he saving it for the combine if he gets to go, or is he going to go back to college football? And if I'm being completely honest here, I don't know what he'll do. Justin, you mentioning that he could return to college football, that's the very first I've heard of it. Maybe I haven't been checking up on what people are saying right now, but I certainly think that in Jane Blue's scenario in case he would have and should have probably gone to the Shrine Bowl to, improve his draft stock and get his name out there a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely think he should have played. To me, there's no reason not to. If you get hurt, obviously that's the worst case scenario for anyone in one of these games, but you have to raise your draft stock because right now he's sitting in undrafted territory, seventh round territory. And although I think he could be a serviceable back in the NFL, with so many pass catching heavy offenses for running backs these days, and with his speed, I think he needed to raise his draft stock. So the only reason I think he would return to college football would be if there was NIL money on the table, or if he feels like another season of college football could get him assuredly into the top 4 or 5 rounds of the NFL draft. Because right now, I don't know if he is securely in there as a drafted player. But we do need to start wrapping this up. I appreciate everyone for listening. Obviously, Robert and Joe, they were dealing with some phone calls throughout the podcast. So next week we'll have a little bit more comprehensive episode. But nonetheless, it was great talking some ball. We'll see you guys next week on the 40 Acres Football Podcast. For Justin Gooseman, Robert Gonsolin, and Joseph Duffy, have a good one.